I'm walking on some glass and there are sharks beneath my feet. There's an aquarium beneath me. It's so cool. It's quite surreal. It's half term for schools here in the UK as we record this, and that means kids have been let loose and their parents are trying to find some fun outings for them. Fun outings like the aquarium.
Welcome to Sea Life London Aquarium. We're really excited to have you.
As we've walked through, I've seen sharks literally in a glass tank below my feet. I've seen lots of fish too, and giant starfish. And in a corner, somewhat more tucked away and less attended by the kids, are a collection of brightly coloured corals, washing gently in the current. The astonishing thing about coral is they're not actually plants. They're in fact a collection of tiny living animals, which support 25% of all marine creatures. And some of the coral reefs have been growing for over 50 million years. Corals are under threat because of climate change. In fact, they could totally disappear by 2100. And that could mean our grandkids, our great-grandkids, might not be able to see them in the wild and only in an aquarium like this. Fortunately, people around the world are trying to stop that from happening. On the climate question from the BBC World Service, can we save our corals? I'm Gray Jackson. Caroline, how are you?
Good, how are you? It's great to see you, Anne.
Meet Caroline Steele, an old friend of mine from my days at the BBC's Radio Science Unit. She now hosts another BBC World Service programme called Crowd Science. And actually, you may remember her from previous editions of The Climate Question. Anyway, she's here to talk us through the science of corals and how climate change is impacting them.
What's in here?
I don't really know what I'm looking for. And where better than London Aquarium?
Do you know why coral is so colourful? You can get purple coral, red coral, even green coral. What's going on?
Please do tell me.
Well, the coral itself is actually clear, but living inside the coral are millions of tiny little algae called zooxanthellae, and they are really colourful, and they make the coral look colourful.
Why would the zooxanthellae live on the coral, and why would the coral allow that?
Well, it's good for both the zooxanthellae and the coral. So the zooxanthellae are living inside the coral's hard calcium carbonate shell, so they're protected from predators. It's a nice home for some algae. Now, these algae photosynthesize, so they turn light from the sun into energy and food, which the coral takes from the zooxanthellae. So the zooxanthellae feeds the coral provides them with a nice home. It's kind of like a nice flat share relationship.
So our oceans are warming as a consequence of climate change. What does that mean for coral?
So it's not good news, and there are two reasons why. So when water's warm, when the ocean's temperature increases, the zooxanthellae leave the coral, and the coral goes this horrible kind of ghostly white, which might be familiar because that's coral bleaching.
Yes, I've seen this before, like lots of white ghostly fingers sticking out of the ocean floor and no fish.
Yeah, it kind of looks like a spooky black and white coral graveyard, but it doesn't actually have to be the end for the coral. Coral reefs can completely recover from this if conditions return to normal fast enough. But in the last 10 years, the gaps between coral bleaching events haven't been long enough, and a lot of coral reefs have been totally lost this way.
Right, okay, so they're essentially starving because they no longer have that algae, that zooxanthellae, feeding it.
Yes, and there's another problem.
Uh-oh.
So our oceans absorb carbon dioxide from our atmosphere.
Right, and carbon dioxide, CO2, is this key planet warming gas that we worry about, and it's released when we burn fossil fuels, things like coal, oil, gas, which causes our planet to warm. You're saying it's absorbed by oceans?
Yes, and It's a problem because when our oceans absorb carbon dioxide, they become more acidic. So as we release more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, the ocean becomes more acidic, and this can stop coral from growing. And if it gets acidic enough, it can literally start to dissolve the coral. So it can be a real problem.
It's not a pretty picture, is it? Ghostly white coral graveyards slowly dissolving in an ocean of acid. In August 2023, the average temperature of our oceans broke all records, and it's been pretty much above average every day since then. And so maybe it wasn't all that surprising that last week, the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration declared that a global mass coral bleaching event is underway. You'll be pleased to know that we'll be hearing about solutions from Caroline later in the show. She's been to Puerto Rico. But for now, you and I are going to meet one of the world's leading coral experts.
My name is Ove Hergulberg, and I'm a professor at the University of Queensland, and I have been many decades in climate change and oceans and solutions.
And I read you're one of the most cited authors on climate change. Congratulations.
Yeah,
That's a pretty good accolade, isn't it?
Well, apparently someone else put it up there because universities get a lot of money from being associated with, productive individuals, I guess.
I mean, I feel very fortunate in that I have dived on the Great Barrier Reef and, in fact, many different reefs across the world. And they are wonderful, beautiful, magical places to be. But, you have so much more experience of coral reefs than I ever have. And many people in the world might never have seen a coral reef before. Can you just maybe tell a story why you fell in love with it?
Well, I think, I'd gone to coral reefs as a kid and seen beautiful places and so on. But it was only when I was sort of old and understood what biodiversity was and then looked down at, for example, strange-looking crabs to beautiful clownfish, that are nestling between the tentacles of a sea anemone, And I remember looking under the stone in the intertidal region and just seeing all these amazing creatures. A goby, which is a little fish that lives with a blind shrimp. And the goby looks out, they share a burrow, and the goby keeps an eye out for predators. And when they come by, it tells the shrimp time to go in. That intricacy of, that's just incredible. I mean, when you look down and realise when we go, go on for hours here, but it is such a cool place to go. And it's sort of like a cathedral or a holy place in terms of diversity.
They really are incredible places. As I said before, 25% of marine animals depend on them. They provide so many nooks and crannies to hide in. And apparently, they're a great place to make friends, whether you're an algae or a blind shrimp. They're important for us too, whether we live nearby them or not. Corals provide us with food, with medicine, with income, and even protect our shores from erosion. Ove is acutely aware of this and has been working to save our reefs from climate change since he helped discover that it was warmer waters which were causing our corals to bleach. This was back in the 1980s when he was a young, fresh-faced PhD student. It was also a time when climate change was often denied.
Yeah, I think this was a growing idea among scientists who were, like me, trying to understand what was going on. Talking to one of my colleagues who would come into the field, we went to Lizard Island. It was this beautiful place where there were beautiful corals everywhere. And simply asked the question, what was causing the corals to bleach? And when you looked at this, it's like, okay, it could be too much light, could be temperature, could be salinity, it could be a disease. So how do you do that? You set up a trial and you put some corals at different types of conditions and you see who bleaches and who doesn't. And you have to then back that up with observation to make sure that you're not just saying there's bleaching and in fact the coral just died. And so once we did that, it was like, wow, this is happening at 1 to 2 degrees above the summer temperature. And there was a pushback from other scientists who were not ready to really look at the evidence, and there wasn't a lot of evidence. And there were people like myself. So I guess, was in a mode where I was starting to understand the enormity of the problem that we were facing.
Ove had the smoking gun. It was the warmer water that was causing the corals to bleach and die. I studied history of science, Ove, and when you were talking about people pushing back against your findings and the connection between coral bleaching and climate change, I wondered whether that was just the nature of science, that's quite common when new discoveries are made, or whether it was something about climate change that perhaps people push back a little bit harder as a result?
Look, I think there definitely was a hyped up situation, which is where a controversial idea was coming out, suggesting that we didn't have centuries before we had to really worry about this stuff. And so for me, the pushback was expected. I don't make light of this, but I used to get extremely aggressive emails, coal interests, fossil fuels, and people that didn't really want to have a sudden switch away from coal-fired energy. There was various people in the Australian political system that were not so happy about the implications of the science. And of course, it's been disastrous. It's delayed us by a huge number of years.
This is The Climate Question from the BBC World Service. We make this show for curious minds, so send us your questions and we'll answer them. Email them to theclimatequestion@bbc.com. This week we've been speaking to Ove Hoegel-Berg, a scientist who changed the course of history by helping to establish the link between climate change and coral bleaching. What does he think we can do about it?
So the idea here is that you reduce the emissions to zero as quickly as possible while identifying those reefs that are least exposed to climate change and protect them as much as you can. I think what we have to do is to treat corals like we would treat a hospital patient. I mean, you've got to take the stress off them to give them the best chance of surviving. They have as good a chance of getting through as we can give them.
Make them as healthy as possible so they'll better weather the virus that is climate change. There are some coral restoration projects that aim to do just that, finding out which corals seem to survive warmer waters better, then growing them in tanks and putting them back into the wild. My friend Caroline Steele, who you heard at the aquarium before, has been to see one such project. Haven't you, Caroline?
Yeah, I got to go to Puerto Rico with the World Service show I present called Crowd Science.
Lucky you. What was that like?
It's an interesting place. It's a real sort of collision of cultures. So it's a former Spanish colony and most people there speak Spanish, not English.
Yeah, but it's a US territory, right?
It is. And in some ways, Puerto Rico feels really American, but also it's a Caribbean island with a really relaxed way of life. I drove all the way around the edge on this ring road and it's just a string of beautiful beaches, busy with local people, swimming, sunbathing, snorkeling. Truly island paradise.
I mean, it sounds like you had a great holiday, but you were there to do some work for Crowd Science. What was it about?
So yeah, the corals really aren't faring well for a number of reasons, including climate change.
Right, but people are trying to protect them.
Yeah, so there are a few different schemes trying to save the reefs. There's one run by the Institute for Socio-Ecological Research, which I visited at one of their bases in Puerto Rico on the edge of the ocean, surrounded by beautiful mangroves.
Lovely.
There isn't a building there, but more of a sort of marquee without walls and rows of water troughs, which are usually used for cattle, but instead filled with coral.
Why are they filled with coral?
It's a coral nursery.
Coral nursery.
Yeah.
Like daycare for toddlers.
I mean,
corals.
Pretty much exactly that. So they take corals from the reef, look after them, and then return them to the ocean when they're all grown up.
Oh,
quite sweet.
Yeah.
Which Executive Director Dr. Stacey Williams told me can be faster than letting them grow in the wild.
So normally corals grow about, on average, 2 centimeters per year, so they're very, very slow. And when we cut them into small pieces, like by 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters or by a centimeter per centimeter, they grow double, triple the time that they would normally grow. So this is a way that we can produce corals at a quicker rate than just kind of watching them grow naturally on a reef.
Just to describe what I'm looking at, so it looks a bit like a bathtub balanced on bricks.
Yeah.
And in it, you've filled it with water, there's a filter down one end, and then on the bottom you have, I don't know, maybe 150 tiny little circles of coral.
So in these tanks, you can see the scientific name is Dendrogyra cylindris. It's also the common name's pillar coral. And this coral is pretty much becoming extinct throughout the Caribbean and in Florida.
I mean, to me, it sort of just looks like a fluffy
fuzzy
sponge.
Yeah, because it has its polyps out because it wants to eat. And you can see it. It's actually pretty nice when you they squirt a little bit of food. It will grab, with its tentacles, the food and bring it to the mouth.
Okay, it's saying, excuse me, dinner time.
Yes.
I've heard that some corals will even eat small fish. And as we're about to find out, they also eat each other.
It's kind of tricky with coral because when you bring the what we call mother coral or donor coral back into the tanks, and we cut that coral, we have to keep those pieces together. Even if it's the same species, like if we cut this same species, another piece, those might be different genotypes. And if it's a different genotype, even though it's the same species, it will fight with each other and won't fuse. Yeah.
What?
So you have to really be organized when you're dealing with coral.
So can I just check what you said before? Because it is genuinely mind-blowing, so I want to make sure that I've understood it properly. So you've made sure, essentially, that the pieces of coral are genetically identical, i.e. they've come from the same mother coral.
Yes.
Because if they're put with, even though it's the same species, but a genetically different bit of coral, they will compete with each other rather than work together.
Yes, exactly.
How do they know whether or not they're related?
They will put out their mesenterial filaments and you could see it, and they will start fighting and destroying whoever's stronger or whatever's stronger will start fighting the tissue, and killing the tissue until the other one becomes dominant and starts taking its space back.
So if they're identical twins, no problem. But if it's your brother or sister, i.e. slightly different from you genetically, a different genotype, as you call it, your lunch.
Exactly. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, wild. I looked up how they kill each other, Caroline, and it's really bonkers. And it varies from species to species, but apparently some will thrust a thin string-like appendage from the stomach and then try to digest them from the outside in. Another might reach its tentacles out and sting it all over. It's vicious. Forget dog eat dog. It's coral eat coral out there.
Let's get ready to rumble! Knockout!
And they're also looking at other animals to help the coral reef survive.
Other animals?
Yes, so Stacey and her team are breeding sea urchins and crabs.
Right. Why?
Because they make great pets, Greer, obviously. So corals compete with algae for space and resources on the seafloor.
But I thought you said coral was dependent on algae to provide it with food. It grows on it and with inside it, and it gives the coral its colour, the
Zooxanthellae.
Right.
Yes, true. Well remembered. This is a different species of algae. So the Zooxanthellae lives inside the coral. This kind of algae either lives next door to or even on the coral, and that's what causes the problem.
Right. Why does it cause a problem?
Just because they're basically wanting to use the same stuff as the coral, the same nutrients, the same light. So it's just sort of competing for resources. And Stacey's hoping that by releasing sea urchins and crabs onto the sea floor, they will eat this algae and reduce the competition for the coral. I asked Stacey if I could have a look at one of her favourite urchins.
Yeah, pick up one right here.
Oh my gosh, okay, so you're just putting your hand into the tank full of sea urchins and picking one up. Whoa, its spines are so long. And they're all twitching and it's purpley.
Yeah, so this species has a particular long spines compared to other species, and it has venom. So
It has venom. It's in your hand.
It has, yeah. So if you do get pricked by this urchin, it will hurt.
You
and
say
it's really,
holding the prickly urchin with your bare hand. Have you ever been accidentally pricked?
Oh yeah, many times, like on my knees, on my hands. This is like a young adult, so it's maybe about 3 centimeters, and it can grow up to 10 centimeters in size.
Oh wow, so it can get really big.
Yeah, it could get pretty big.
And they're really important because they eat the algae that competes with coral. So by adding these to the ecosystem, you're giving the coral a better chance at surviving.
Yeah, so urchins are very unique because if I could flip this one around, there's a mouth. And they have these unique teeth. And these teeth are very strong. There are 5 of them. And they allow the urchin to scrape at the reef. So they can really keep algae at bay at a coral reef because they stay in one area and maintain that area clean. The overall end goal of this project is to enhance coral survivorship when we outplant them. And that is, like by releasing a whole wide range of herbivores to these reefs.
And do you know if it's working? Have you been able to assess whether or not the corals that you grow here stand a better chance of surviving in the wild?
So actually we were out this morning. So we actually saw the corals that our partner Sea Ventures outplanted a couple of reefs here in Fajardo. And they're actually doing really well. They're fusing. They didn't bleach during the bleaching event.
Wow.
So that is unique because there were corals, larger colonies around them that did bleach and actually died from the bleaching event this past summer. Generally, they look pretty good.
This sounds really exciting and sounds really hopeful that these corals are surviving. But I do wonder what's the picture globally and whether there's any sort of data that suggests that this is an effective tool.
Yeah, it doesn't look quite so hopeful long term. So work like this is really expensive. The Institute for Socio-Ecological Research just received a grant for $10.6 million to expand their reef work.
Right, okay. And I'm assuming that only a small amount of the reef is being restored and it would cost far too much to do much more of the reef.
Yeah, so it's only really justifiable in areas where the reef is bringing in a lot of money.
Tourism, scuba diving.
Yeah.
Right.
And some research suggests that lab-grown corals won't be able to handle the warming oceans and increased acidification that we're on track to experience by 2100. I put some of these concerns to our coral expert, Stacey, back in Puerto Rico.
So actually during this last bleaching event, our tanks were kind of like a refuge. We were able to keep those corals alive until waters cooled down. Since we had this bleaching event, we've been in the water and we've been tagging corals that haven't been affected by the bleaching or the disease. So in the future, we will collect a small piece of their tissue and reproduce them here in our tanks because those are the more resilient corals. So that's how we're taking that 2-step fold of, coping with these disturbances and figuring out how we can make these reefs more resilient.
How are you feeling about the future of Puerto Rico's coral reefs? Are you optimistic?
I'm optimistic because I know that I'm not alone. It is very hard on a regular basis. Like yearly we have something that affects coral reefs in a major way. But what gives me hope is knowing that there are many others like us that are working to better coral reefs.
Caroline, how do you feel?
I think I'm sort of leaving this show feeling quite optimistic, and even though lab-grown coral might not be enough, this research is really in its early days. The first lab-grown coral was only successfully introduced into the ocean less than a decade ago, and we've got another 7 decades until 2100. So I'm hoping people like Stacey can kind of pull it out the bag.
Yeah, and I guess looking at it through the climate lens, most of the big polluters have got these zero emission targets, right? So maybe we won't have to rely on coral restoration projects. Maybe we'll get a handle on climate change.
It does seem a bit more logical to tackle the problem rather than the symptoms, and we could probably save Stacey a lot of time if we managed to do that.
Yeah, and I was speaking to Ove Hergeberger earlier. He's been working on this problem for decades. He's one of the most respected scientists in the field. And he's also confident about the future of coral. Take a listen.
I think we will get there. For me, it's been an exciting ride which hasn't yet finished. There's a lot of talk and no action, and I think we just have to realise that the chips are down. We have to get this job done. I think once we stabilise coral reefs and we reduce emissions to zero, I look forward to the sort of, the headlines of newspapers in the Miami area saying another channelway has been clogged by coral that's getting too much. We need to scrape coral back. This is an emergency. And that to me would be, yes, if I'm still alive and that happens in 20 years or so, that would give me great pleasure, because it would have been, I saw the problem occur, I saw everyone galvanised to solve the problem, and now we have that sort of fix.
My thanks to Ove, Stacey, and to you, Caroline. It's been really lovely working with you again, just like the old Radio Science days, hey?
Thanks for having me. It's been great fun.
So you can like, subscribe, follow Crowd Science and also The Climate Question wherever you get your podcasts. This week, the producer was Octavia Woodward. The series producer is Simon Watts, sound designed by Tom Brignall. Brenda Brown is our production coordinator, and it was presented by me, Greer Jackson. I'll see you next time.